Good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Bertram, and I'm providing tech support today to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for our final webinar. Before the webinar begins, I'd just like to go over a few household items. I think many of you may have already heard this, but for anybody that's new, we have over 150 people that are registered for the webinar today. So while the presentation is on, we will have all of your computers muted. And the presentation today is a shorter presentation. The majority of our time today will be for questions and answers. So we would encourage you, as soon as you can, to start entering your questions into the question box. And then when we do get to the question and answer session, we will be answering the questions in the order in which they have arrived. So with no further ado, I would like to turn the webinar over to Kelly.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kelly Larson, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst for the Land Remediation section at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. Thanks for joining us today. This is the last webinar of a 10-part webinar series that was discussing the 10 revised protocols that came into effect on February 1st of this year. With me today to answer your questions are the entire Land Remediation Management team, including Danielle Gerbovac, the Director, Valentina Yatscalo, Heather Osachoff, Alan McCammon, and Natalia Kokleva. Also here are most of the protocol leads, Ingrid Sorensen, Kirsten Webster, Vince Hannemeyer, Liliana Girardi, Steve Dankovy, Peter Yan, and Jason Nelson. Next slide, please, Cindy. The ministry staff are participating in this webinar from across the Lower Mainland and the Fraser Valley, as well as from the southern Vancouver Island. We would like to acknowledge with respect the unceded traditional territories of the Coquitlam, Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Musqueam, Kaikate, Kwantlen, Squamish, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations, as well as the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work within these territories and strive to be mindful of the connection the land holds to Indigenous peoples and for the animals and plants we share this place with. And I just wanted to recognize the artwork presented on this slide is by Indigenous artist Lawrence Paul Yuxwalupton of Coast Salish and Okanagan heritage. Next slide, please, Cindy. So to start off the session, I have a few summary slides to go through, as well as some polling questions. And as Cindy mentioned, during this time, we'd like you to start posing your questions in the question box. Please reference the specific protocol your question is related to when stating your question. And for this webinar, if you would prefer to speak your question, you can just indicate that in the question box, specify the protocol that you have a question about, and when it's your turn, Cindy will unmute you and you can speak your question. So now I believe is the first polling question. So how many webinar sessions did you attend? So please select one of the options, 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, or 9 or 10. We did have very high attendance for all of the webinars, which is really great to see.
Just about at 70% of participants.
Perfect.
Okay. And closing in on 80%, I'll close it at 80. There we are now, and share the results.
Oh, wow. So most of you attended over half, if not all of the webinars. So that's great that everybody was participating. Thanks a lot, Cindy. We'll move on to the next slide. Okay. So I just wanted to go over again the legal hierarchy in BC, just so everyone's very clear about laws, regulations, protocols, and where they all fall. So the highest level are laws that are passed by the Legislative Assembly of BC. Laws are commonly known as acts, so we operate under the Environmental Management Act. Acts give authority to others to make regulations or protocols. Then there's the regulations, so EMMA gives the authority to the minister and the lieutenant governor and council to make regulations. The contaminated sites regulation imposes requirements that must be followed unless an exemption is specifically provided in the act or the regulation itself. Under the regulation are protocols. EMMA also gives authority to make directors' protocols for very specific activities. Protocols are similar to codes of practice, and they impose procedural requirements that must be met unless they are specifically exempted. Requirements in a protocol cannot contradict a requirement in EMMA or the CSR unless EMMA specifically authorizes an exemption in the protocol. Requirements in acts, regulations, and protocols are the must-dos. They're legally enforceable, and those out of compliance with requirements may be subject to fines or penalties. And then finally, we have guidance. This information is found in our remaining guidance documents on our webpage or on the new ministry web pages. These are not legal requirements, but ministry expectations or best practices. Applicants can step outside of the expected processes provided in our guidance and use their professional judgment when investigating and remediating contaminated sites, but they must provide robust rationale for the ministry's consideration. In these instances, the applicant should be prepared for the ministry review to take longer. The next slide, Cindy. So the CSR Stage 13 amendment was brought into force on February 1st of this year. It brought into force changes to the site identification provisions in the Environmental Management Act, Contaminated Sites Regulation, and several other municipal statutes like the Local Government Act, Islands Trust Act, Land Title Act, Oil and Gas Activities Act, and the Vancouver Charter. Amendments were also made to the Administrative Penalties Regulation under EMMA. For more information about these changes, we recommend that you review the first webinar in this series once it's available on our website, or there are 2 webinar recordings from the fall of 2020 that are already available on our presentations webpage. CSR Stage 13 implementation included revising 10 protocols, as you know, and updating the site remediation website. The next slide, please, Cindy. The 10 protocols that are listed on the slide were updated to reflect the previous stages of amendments to the CSR, new science, and policy changes. Some of the changes reflect legal advice and recent case law to ensure that requirements set within each protocol are enforceable. The draft protocols were posted for a 45-day comment period back in the fall, and all the comments that were received were considered when finalizing the protocols. The ministry will post a response to comments report soon onto our website. 8 webinars have been presented over the last few weeks that detail changes to each protocol. There were also informative Q&A sessions included in each webinar, and the recordings will be posted to our website in the near future as well if you did miss any of them. We'll send out a site remediation news message when the response to comments report and the webinar recordings are available. Now, there are 2 more polling questions that we would like to put up now. Cindy, if you could. The first one is, were the webinar sessions informative? So your options are, they are generally informative, a good mix of information, general and technical, or too much general, not enough technical, or too much technical.
Okay, we're just shy of our 70%. I'll close it off in about 2 seconds.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let's see, so about 50% said generally informative, good mix of information and technical detail. Some said it was quite a few of you said it was too much general, not enough technical. So that's good information to know for future webinars. Thank you. Cindy, can you put up the next one, please? So this is just a transition question. So if an application was received prior to February 1st, 2021, is it reviewed against the former version of the protocol? Yes or no?
Just about there. I'll close it off now. And the results.
All right, yes, you are correct. It is yes. So if we receive your application before February 1st, it will be reviewed against the former version. If we receive your applications after February 1st, it'll be reviewed against the newer version. And the same thing goes for release requests. If we received it prior to February 1st, it will be under the previous Administrative Guidance 6 process, and new applications have to be to the new scenarios. Perfect. Okay, so the last slide I have here is about website modernization. We received direction from government to modernize our website to make information more accessible and current. So Stage 13 kicked off that web modernization project. Relevant content from over 40 fact sheets, guidance, and procedure documents was incorporated into revised or new web pages. 12 of those documents were relating to site identification, and they were converted into 5 comprehensive web pages that has information about how the process works, how to complete a site disclosure statement, how to submit a release request. There's a page that's specifically for municipalities and approving officers on how to complete their roles for assessing and forwarding site disclosure statements. And other pages include contaminant migration risk assessment, background concentrations in soil and groundwater, professional reliance, guidance for approved professionals making applications under P6, pre-approvals, and performance verification plans. So there's been quite a few changes. It's really important to familiarize yourself with the new information because some of the content and policy has changed. And I also just wanted to note that mandatory requirements that were previously in guidance were moved into the protocols themselves wherever possible during this stage. Also wanted to note that this project of web modernization will continue with more changes happening to the page organization. I know a lot of the pages are in a very strange organization at the moment, and that will be changing to, hopefully it'll be easier to find pages. And we'll continue to convert PDF guidance and fact sheets into more modern web pages. There are updated forms. The site profile was changed out for the site disclosure statement. And just a note about the forms, we've mentioned this a few times now, that there are issues with downloading the forms. It's a government-wide problem that is related to outdated software that has been used to create our forms, and they are not compatible with some internet browsers. There's currently no solution to the problem, only workarounds if you're having trouble accessing the form. We have added some instructions to our forms page on how to download them if they're not doing it automatically. The simplest thing to do is actually find the form that you need and right-click on the link and save it to your desktop and then open it from your desktop. That's the surefire way for it to work properly. So that is the end of my little bit here. So Cindy, the next slide. We will start taking questions. I just wanted to make a note of the different generic email boxes that we have. So there is one specific to site identification. Any submissions for release requests or site disclosure statements or questions about site identification should be sent to siteid@gov.bc.ca. Questions about protocols should be sent to the remediation FAQs inbox, and general inquiries can continue going to the site@gov.bc.ca inbox. So everyone is going to turn on their cameras and we can start going with questions. Cindy?
We do have several questions. The first one is actually for you, Kelly.
Oh,
Off-site
okay.
migration of contamination from heating oil UST. Could you confirm only Schedule 2 use if land use on both the source site and the receiving site is commercial or industrial?
The way it is written, it is that the source was a commercial or industrial site, not that the affected parcel is an industrial or commercial site. So that the affected site can still be residential the way it's currently written. That's something we'll be keeping an eye on.
Okay, and the second question is for you as well, Kelly. Are ancillary activities to the main commercial activity considered Schedule 2 use? An example being sporadic equipment repair for a tool rental company. Is that E1? Or is the purpose of Schedule 2 to capture the primary business activities?
I would say it could be, but that's where, you know, it's site specific. That's where professional judgment would come into play. How significant was that activity? Should it be considered a Schedule 2 activity? I don't know if anyone else on the panel has anything to add to that answer. Anyone? Nope. Seeing some
Okay.
heads shaking.
We'll move on to the next question then. The next question is for Valentina. If a certificate of compliance is issued for a site with ongoing Schedule 2 use, does the certificate of compliance remain valid beyond the date of issuance for the purpose of being exempt from the requirement to provide a site disclosure statement?
Okay, I forgot to unmute myself. Well, I would recommend to familiarize yourself with the exemption sections in the CSR, specifically section 4. So if a Schedule 2 activity is ongoing, then that you need to make sure that no contamination was added. So it's a bit confusing question. So if the activity is ongoing, then obviously COC, validity of COC remains, the document remains valid as long as there was no new contamination. So I think I'm reading this right. For the purposes of exemption, I will specifically note section 4 sub 1. Let me see. I think that it's sub 1 that speaks to the certificate, the certification document, which could be either COC or approval in principle, should be valid for the current and or future users. So I would really recommend reading and understanding section 4 sub 1 with exemptions. That pretty much answers the question. I just don't want to go and read the whole section. The legal language is not going to be helpful, but I can refer you to 4 sub 1.
Thank you, Valentina. Our next question is for Kirsten. Is selection of terrestrial receptors in accordance with Protocol 1 now completed by using the forms in Appendix B of Protocol 13?
Thank you. The Protocol 13 forms need to be completed as part of the receptor selection process. So in Protocol 1, the full requirements are shown, but you do need to fill in the Protocol 13 forms as well. And it's part of the process. If you look through them, you'll cover the same parts, I guess you can call it. Yeah.
Thank you. We're back to you, Kelly, for the next question. Is
Cindy, I hate to
sheet metal
interrupt, but I think you missed a question. It was the one previous. There was a previous question by Jerome that you missed.
Is that the one that Kirsten just answered about terrestrial receptors?
No, it's the one below the first.
Oh, okay.
Question.
You're correct. Is this the one to Valentina?
It's to
If
Heather.
To Heather? Oh, okay. It's not showing up in my.
Oh.
There we are. I'm sorry. Heather, please. What is the criteria to determine responsibility for fill for a current owner or operator?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a little hard on a webinar to describe all the areas where responsibility comes into play. So I'd want to start at the high level. So the Environmental Management Act requires you to be a responsible person for contamination at a site. So the criteria for determining responsibility is lengthy. It has to do with site records. It has to do with activities, Schedule 2 activities. It has to do with contamination. It has to do with historical records of when the fill occurred, who did the fill. What the ministry requires is a walkthrough of the story of when the fill was put there, who was responsible for putting it there, and the relationship to the current owner of a site or responsible person of contamination at a site. So the criteria would be multiple lines of evidence. It would be a lot of information, and it would be pulled together into a logical story of what happened. So actually, I wanted Liliana just to add to that if I had sort of been too high of a level there. Liliana, please go ahead.
Well, I guess it depends on if Jerome's question is if they are responsible for cleaning the field at their site or not, and if your question is based on an area-wide site, then the answer is yes. You are responsible for your own field, your own contamination. You just don't have to go and delineate it offsite. If it's about someone else placed the field there, then and you have no responsible owner, it's still yours. I guess if it's more about a site-specific question that you have, Jerome, please send us an email and we can try to answer it less broadly, if you want to put it that way. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So Kelly, is sheet metal fabricating C6, metal smelting, processing or finishing industries and activities 6, welding or machine shops, repair or fabrication?
I see the next two questions are about interpretation of Schedule 2 activities. I'm not sure how I was determined to be the Schedule 2 expert here. I think I would like to see if anyone else has an answer to that. And otherwise, I kind of think maybe you should forward this question to one of the generic inboxes for us to answer, and actually to think about it, because off the top of my head, I don't know enough about either of these two activities to answer the questions definitively. So does anyone else that's on the panel have a definitive answer to that? Otherwise, that would be my response, to please send those in, or they're here, we can respond to them, take them away and respond later.
Nobody?
Nope.
Okay, just before we move on with questions, Bob has just a short note. He was appreciating the art that had been provided. Our next question is for Ingrid. Ingrid, in Protocol 1, can you confirm that the maximum PF concentrations of COPCs are used in the initial screen and statistics can be used as a secondary screen with rationale? In Protocol 1, can you confirm in the PF maximum concentrations of COPCs are used in, is that a repeat of the question there?
I think that's a repeat. Yeah.
It is a repeat.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, maximum concentrations are used to screen COPCs into the problem formulation, and you can use statistics in the problem formulation following initial screening with rationale to either argue that pathways are insignificant or incomplete.
Thank you. Kelly, when and where will the webinar recordings be posted online so people can watch the presentations that they missed?
On our webpage under guidance and resources, there's a page for site remediation presentations, and that's where it'll be posted. We'll send out a site remediation news message once they are posted, and it should be sometime hopefully in the next couple of weeks once I get them all downloaded and sent through the proper channels.
Peter, we have a question for you from Tara. Can you confirm that an NOIR is required for risk-based remediation that does not include physical remediation? That being when only risk assessment is used?
Thanks, Tara. Yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned on Wednesday's webinar, this is really a great question. We need some time for the internal discuss and then to have a clear answer on that. So yeah, please forward that question to the site remediation FAQ inbox if you are interested in the final answer. Yeah, for all the attendees, you can just send that in, and then once we have a final answer, we will reply through that email box. Thank you.
Okay, Valentina, how does one go about requesting a director's release in the absence of AG6?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The one would start with reading Local Governments Act or Vancouver Charter or any other applicable act, and then use our website Basically, as Kelly explained earlier, the legal structure is pretty obvious and clear, and the change was minor. All we did, we moved the guidance onto a web page, but basically you need to follow the legislative requirements.
The next question is for you as well, Valentina, with regards to the website. Can the website search function be limited to return results only from the Ministry of Environment or site remediation web pages? Currently, it returns a lot of irrelevant results from all BC government websites.
We had this thought ourselves because we basically are having the same issue. We talked to our web people because, as we mentioned several times, we don't manage how our site operates. The functionality is defined by different levels of government. And unfortunately, this is not possible at the moment. We did ask that question, and we were told that the search cannot be limited. We will, that's an issue for us as well. So we will keep working on that and see what other tools we can provide. But unfortunately, at the moment, we can't change that.
Okay, thank you. Heather, I have a very long question for you. What was the primary reason for eliminating AG15 and ability of CSAP to approve non-delineated off-site in area of widespread poor quality fill? This affects all sites that have existing releases under AG6 and approvals in principle that are based on CSAP approvals that are based on my computer just jumped. Sorry about that. Are based on not having to delineate impacts and will require ministry pre-approval under Protocol 6. Did the ministry consult with all stakeholders, and why would they want to take this on when short-staffed and pre-approvals are already backlogged?
Okay, I think I'll try to segment this. I'd like to start with the end there. The ministry is not short-staffed and pre-approvals are not backlogged. We're actually processing work as we always have. Our turnaround times are the same as they've always been, maybe even on some types of applications slightly improved. So I just wanted to clarify that today. So this is about draft AG15 and the ability and what occurred in practice prior to February 1st. So the requirement to submit a pre-approval for sites with approved professional recommendations where there was not going to be complete fulfillment of the EMA, CSR, and protocol requirements was always in place. So if an approved professional was going to submit a recommendation for a site where there was going to be incomplete delineation, remediation, or the entire extent was not going to be covered by legal instruments, the requirement existed. Draft AG15, Admin Guidance 15, was draft. It was posted on our website, never reviewed, never approved, never fully brought into force. So while there's some interpretation that the ministry has changed something, at the same time, the requirement was the same prior to February 1st as it is today. So for the area wide that this question is addressing, the ministry does want to review area wide pre-approvals. This is a really important part of the EMA and CSR requirements for delineation and completion of remediation at contaminated sites. So we have ensured that Protocol 6 contains the content from draft AG15 that the ministry desires and wishes and now requires to review for approved professionals to submit. Now, parts of draft AG15 were moved to a new pre-approvals webpage. As Kelly mentioned in the introductory slides, there's a hierarchy of legal requirements with the EMA, the CSR, the protocols being legal requirements, and then the webpage being guidance. And so parts of draft AG15, which was guidance before, were moved to the webpage, which provides instructions and expectations, and parts of draft AG15 were moved into Protocol 6, which are the legal requirements today. Now, just one more point, just to wrap up this, to cover off one of the other parts of the question. Protocol 6 was a part of the Stage 13 amendment because it contains pertinent information to site identification. There's a requirement that pre-approvals from approved professionals are sought prior to the application, previously for site profile releases, and currently today for site, I'm sorry, I may say this wrong, but site notification releases, site releases. And so P6 needed to be updated as a part of the Stage 13 package. That's why it was one of the 10 protocols. During that update, the ministry conducted a thorough consideration of all the materials, which included draft AG15. Draft AG15 could not exist as it existed. It was draft. It needed to be finalized. And so that's why the content was moved into Protocol 6. And it was finalized as a part of the Stage 13 amendment. Now, one more point just to add to this for consultation, which is one of the questions, did the ministry consult? The ministry did consult. We posted Protocol 6 on our webpage from November to January, I believe, Kelly, it was. And we solicited, the request for comments, the request for feedback. We really wanted to hear from everyone about the draft Protocol 6 version. And I'm not sure what else to sort of say about that. The ministry did let everyone know in a site news release that draft AG15 was being eliminated and moved to a web page. That was in the November original site remediation news. So we believe we've done everything we needed to do. We followed ministry best practices, we followed government practices in posting the protocols for comment, and then we considered those comments when we finalized the Protocol 6 version that came into force February 1st. So thank you, everyone. That's my answer to all of those.
Thank you, Heather. You did a great job. Liliana, we have a question for you from Michael with regards to EMA 54. If an approval in principle has been issued for a site, there still appears to be a requirement to submit an NIR. Please confirm.
Are you sure the question is for me?
I had you identified for it. Is there someone else that would like to take that question?
I'll answer it. It's Alan here. Yeah, the answer is yes. There's nothing related to the duty to notify that has an exemption related to AIPs or anything.
Okay, our next question comes from Cindy. There is no guidance on how to determine cultural significance of ecological receptors. Cultural significance is not in the area of expertise of engineers, geoscientists, biologists, chemists. Will the Ministry of Environment provide further clarification on the expectation of determining the cultural significance of ecological receptors? Ingrid, are you able to answer that one?
Yeah, I'll start by answering that. And I think there's another question below that that's very similar that also asks for an example. So maybe we could combine those two. So to start, I would say that the ministry recognizes that this is an area that needs some work. And I would say that although it's not necessarily in the area of expertise of engineers or geoscientists or biologists, it is in the area of expertise of stakeholders, which hopefully are being consulted with. And that's where you would get the information on what is culturally significant. In terms of providing guidance in the future, that's certainly something we will consider. And an example would be any species that might be important to an Indigenous group near your site. I don't know, do any of the other risk assessors want to add to that?
It's Heather here. I could, as a manager of risk assessment, I will add it's the information will come from rights holders and interested persons. So Indigenous nations may actually be, as Ingrid mentioned, the best source of information, and the ministry expects that an interested party who's affected is consulted with. There's been examples in the past of what this looks like, but it involves meaningful engagement with people who have information. It could be traditional knowledge. It could be various types of groups. It's hard to sort of describe it here, but interviews, the collection of information, the consideration of that information by the responsible person is what the ministry would expect. And so there's only one way to do that, and that's to ask the question and meaningfully and bring that information into the contaminated sites remediation plan.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Danielle Gerber-Vetz here. I just wanted to add to that is I think this is such a great question because I think it's recognizing the diversity that enters into the work of contaminated sites with the introduction of the Declaration Act. So it's a really great question. And I'm not sure that being able to determine cultural significance of ecological receptors necessarily has to be done by engineers and geoscientists and biologists, but then we all have to maybe expand our toolboxes and either acquire that expertise or access resources that have that expertise, as Heather and Ingrid suggested. So there may be, so about the question of whether the ministry will be developing guidance, that is one option, or it could be that we are seeking support from our neighboring ministry with Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, or if there is a very targeted specific resource that's required, perhaps the CSAP executive can lead the membership in developing something that might be helpful in doing the practice. So it's an evolving and a very current topic, but lots that we can delve into there and either work on pieces together or just find the suitable place for that resource to be developed. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Valentina, we have another question with regards to the website. Is it ministry intent to use a website to replace administrative guidance, or the administrative guidance will be updated and reposted again in the near future? It is my personal opinion that the administrative guidance is clearer and easier to use than the web pages.
Thanks for your personal opinion, for sharing it. As we said before, we will not be reposting administrative guidance. We received a direction from the ministry executive to decrease the number of PDFs on the website to start with. Second, we have a new policy, well, it's relatively new, about inclusiveness and accessibility, and that applies to everything we do, not just to the website, but it applies to our daily work and daily communications, and these webinars in particular too. And to make our content accessible, we have to put it on the web so that people with various limitations and challenges could have access to our information. So that's in summary what we are working towards.
Our next question's for Kelly. If a building permit is required to facilitate utility installation, does this fall under the exemption? That an example of that being a site disclosure statement should not be triggered by a building permit?
Yes, there's an exemption in section 4 of the CSR that's for building permits or development permits that are necessary for installing utilities. That's one of the things that's listed under the exemption.
Okay, our next question's for you as well, Kelly. CSR 7.1, what is the scope of consideration in reference to the listed documents? For example, is a summary of site condition required as part of a release request when a PSI is submitted to support a request under CSR 6.2?
I don't know the exact wording of that section, but to respond to the example, a summary of site condition is not required as part of a release request at this time. So the requirements for release requests are listed on our new requesting a release webpage, and that is not one of the requirements.
Okay, Kelly, we have another question for you. The site disclosure statement asks if there are Schedule 2 activities. The SDS is completed by the site owner. Many of the definitions on Schedule 2 leave room for judgment. What is the consequence if a site owner incorrectly thinks their activity is not Schedule 2 and thus does not submit an SDS? Is there a way for somebody to reduce this liability?
So the form, the site disclosure statement itself, is to be filled out by an agent. It can be filled out by an agent on behalf of the site owner. So it doesn't have to be the site owner. The site owner has to sign it so that they understand what their agent has written on the form. So there is that option that someone else complete the form for them, someone like a consultant, for example, but it's not a requirement that they do that. And it does still say, to the best of your knowledge, has a Schedule 2 activity occurred. So there is, of course, room there for some judgment. You know, it's not that common that would be a big issue. But there are also on our webpage under the accordion for how to complete a site disclosure statement, we have added some information for property owners who are doing this on their own. It gives them some information about how to find a bit of, historical information about their site, the site links to the site registry. There's I believe, one for how to look up air photos so they could check out the their site over time, or doing like a land title search, that kind of thing. So there is information available to site owners to help them complete the form, so they don't necessarily have to use a consultant to do that. And again, it is to the best of your knowledge.
Thank you. Our next question is for Valentina from Michael. CSR 6.2, Scenario 2 and 3 releases require the same level of investigation and reporting effort in PSI or DSI remediation plan or SOSC as an approval in principle. Under what scenarios would completing these investigations and in submitting these documents to the Ministry of Environment have any benefit over applying for an approval in principle if it takes as long or longer to get a release notice issued?
Thank you for the question. It's an interesting question. Typically, we leave this decision with the responsible person, depending on their objectives and the budget and other considerations. I can say that, and Kelly, please jump in if you have something to add. Approval in principle is a better option in many occasions for multiple reasons. First, it lets the responsible person to apply for something once and have the site released. Because if you read 4.1 again in CSR, the exemptions, it says that you are released. You don't have to submit SDS and follow the process if you have an AIP. So instead of applying for a scenario 1, new scenario 1, and then applying for a new scenario 2, and then applying for new scenario 3, and basically wasting, I can say, it's a strong word, but wasting this time or waiting for releases for each scenario, you could apply for an AIP and get it done, and that saves you time. Hopefully saves money to the RP as well. The second thing that I think is getting overlooked is that AIP provides a enhanced level of certainty for responsible persons, because that pretty much defines your next steps, and it basically, if done properly, it basically guarantees that responsible persons will not have any unexpected surprises if or should they decide to go for a certificate of compliance. Because sometimes I understand that people get to that late stage and then they have issues when the ministry or the roster, if it's a roster instrument, if it's not high risk site. Then something comes up at that late stage and the building is already built, and then it becomes more expensive and time consuming to, if any issues are identified, to address them. So as a regulator, I'm not sure I understand why this option is being overlooked and underutilized. Maybe we need to hear more about that. But basically, to answer this in the short way, is the release process was issued as an express lane. It was set up for very easy sites. It wasn't set out to deal with complex sites with potential vapor issues and migration of contaminants and things that we have been seeing recently. It has a very limited application, and I would really like to bring this to the attention of this audience that this is the tool that is the release mechanism is a tool that is being applied incorrectly most of the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is to Kelly, again from Ben. Is a heating oil tank associated with a commercial site, not a Schedule 2 site, an example being a paint retail store, is that considered a Schedule 2 activity?
No, it's not. So if you have a bakery or like whatever as an example, and you have a heating oil tank for that site, that's not considered a Schedule 2 activity. So if you look at Schedule 2, each category has a title and a bit more explanation of what the category entails. So I think a lot of people don't read that part. They just go straight to the line item that they're looking for, and you need to read the whole category and the item to get the full picture. And so if you read the introductory heading, if you want to call it that, it says commercial storage, I believe. So F7, I think, is the one we're talking about for petroleum storage, would not apply to a heating oil tank, because it's not for the use of, you're not selling that oil, that heating oil. It's not a commercial thing. It's for heating purposes. So it's the same. This was one of those things that was sort of described in policy in the old guidance document. 13, I think it was, that it had an answer in there about this question, and we haven't changed that policy.
Thank you. Valentina, we have another question with regards to the website. This one's coming from Heather. My question is about administrative guidance, technical guidance, procedural documents that are now labeled no longer in use on the ministry website. I understand that information from these is now included in protocols on the ministry website and other locations. For each individual document, can the ministry please indicate where on the website the information for these documents is now located? Oops, and I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had to scroll down quite a bit further on this one.
Yeah, it's a long question.
Pardon me?
It's a very long question.
It is. So second part, consultants were very familiar with the content in these documents, and now it's difficult to find. Alternatively, can the minister please provide archived previous versions of protocol, administrative guidance, documents, procedures, etc.?
Okay, I will deal with this question part by part because it is a long question. So thank you for the question. Regarding the ask to have information for each individual document included on the website saying where it went, it's going to be problematic for us because, as we mentioned before, certain things went, these things that were mandatory, they were appropriately moved to protocols because protocols are the correct place for mandatory requirements because they're enforceable. Things that were expectations were moved to the pages. So splitting each document into this paragraph went into protocol and this paragraph went into a web page and this has been removed is not feasible for the ministry. If I understand the question correctly, going through each document and just, I think, Kelly, is that 40 documents that we removed?
Yep.
Yeah, so doing this for 40 documents is going to take most of our time, and it may impact other tasks, i.e. issuing various certification documents, answering inquiry management questions, and helping municipalities to implement Stage 13 amendments. So I just don't see how I can justify it to the executive. With regards to the consultants being very familiar with the content on those pages, in the PDFs, I appreciate the difficulty. It's a change management process. I think that once we finish our project of website modernization, it will be easier to find things on our website. It will have a logical flow and the information will be at your fingertips. It's a change management and it will take time. And I would advise as a manager of operations and policy to maybe find time in your day and familiarize yourself with the web pages and with the contaminated sites remediation web site. in general, it's I think it's useful. It's very useful for everyone, including internal staff. And lastly, can the ministry provide archived previous versions of protocols? We sure can, and we will. Protocols are mandatory. They are legal documents. They are mandated under, they're authorized under Environmental Management Act, and they are quasi-regulations. So we are obligated to keep previous versions of protocols. So if you have a need to get a previous version of a protocol, do send your request to the corresponding mailbox, generic mailbox, and we will provide you with a copy. As for copies, archived copies of previous versions, again, we have to decide, we have to weigh this ask against everything else. And I would maybe suggest asking for this on the inquiry management process. Alan, would you have anything to add as a manager sponsor for the process?
No, Valentina, that would be a way that folks could go about doing that.
Thank you. So I think I answered the question. If not, let me know.
Thank you. Carrie's looking for a bit of clarification, Kelly. In Schedule 2, what is meant by yard snow removal dumping? In particular, what is meant by yard?
Yeah, this is another interpretation question for Schedule 2, so I think I'm going to just defer those and I'll respond to them later offline.
Okay. Heather, our next question comes to you from Paul. This is a longer one again. Can you please confirm if either or both of the following scenarios would require pre-approval for a certificate of compliance application? Contamination flow onto site and delineated on site, but not on, I'm sorry, my computer's jumping, not on the upgradant off-site source parcel. And the second one was off-site impacted parcel delineated and defined by METs and bounds.
Well, the meat of this looks to be about flow-through sites. So the question is, either or both would require pre-approval. Contamination flow onto site and delineated on site, but not on the upgrading off-site source. Well, I think if we go through the definition of a flow-through site that I presented in the webinar on Monday, someone who's a flow-through site has contamination entering their site from an off-site upgradient source, as Paul mentions. The site in question does not add to the contamination, and the contamination continues to flow through, exits the site without any contribution from the site. And so the delineation requirement for someone who is not a responsible person for the contamination flowing onto their site and exiting their site is to delineate and remediate their site, just their parcel of land that they own, because they're not a responsible person, if I'm understanding Paul's question right. Now, if an off-site source parcel is their responsibility, they are not a flow-through site. They are the bounds of the contaminated site, boundaries of the contaminated site are what are important to consider. And then the other part of the question, off-site impacted parcel delineated and defined by meets and bounds. I'm sorry, Paul, I'm not understanding that one. We would need to have more info, or you're welcome to submit that as a question, the remediation FAQs email, and we could answer whether meets and bounds of an area. It comes back to responsibility of contamination and the boundaries of a contaminated site. Hopefully that could guide your thinking.
Our next question is from Michael to Valentina. This one is long. CSR 6.2. A client needs a building permit to construct on a portion of a parcel well away from areas of contamination from Schedule 2 activities. Well, they have committed to investigating and remediating the contaminated area. It makes economic sense to carry out the remediation only if they can begin construction of the building at the same time due to the short summer season. However, the current release process will halt building construction until the investigation and preparation of a remediation plan has been completed. So the entire project is no longer economically viable. The previous release process would have accommodated this scenario, but no longer does. With no economic incentive to remediate the contaminated portion of the site, the entire property will remain undeveloped and contaminated. How does this help the environment?
Thanks for this long question, Michael. I'll try to split it if I can, and I potentially may need some help. I'm having difficulty understanding why there is an opinion that previously certain things were not required, and I think it's a perception, and maybe we didn't address it often enough, or maybe for wider audiences. Site release process, as it existed in previous Administrative Guidance 6, was always asking for the same things. It was asking for delineation of contamination. It was asking for a remediation plan, and it was asking for all these things that we keep asking. The remediation plan was always required, and it was always supposed to be having a description of a certain remediation activities and dates. And if you remember, if you read your release letters, then you would see that every release letter, every release notice had mandatory conditions under imposed under 54 sub 3 sub D about annual statements, so that the ministry could verify and validate that the activities were indeed conducted in line with the proposed remediation plan. So I'm not really, I'm not getting the sense of why we're getting the same questions. And same about delineation and DSIs and PSIs. I think that maybe potentially in the past, people were missing that part of the release notice, which was saying that detailed site investigation is required, or preliminary site investigation is required. I am not sure why people were not reading this, so it's very difficult for me to deal with the hypothetical situations. All I can say is we didn't change that. That was always a requirement. What changed, though, is the ability, the enhanced ability of the ministry to ensure compliance, verification, promotion, and enforcement. And as the whole initiative was implemented to ensure that we streamline the process, make it more efficient, and free some staff time to specifically spend it on compliance verification and promotion. And that was supported by our minister, and it was supported by the legislature. So I think what you're seeing is not a change in approach, it's a change in compliance effort. And I think as a regulator, this is what we are striving for. Our main objective is to protect human health and the environment. And now we feel that we are in a better position to ensure that we are definitely working on that objective. Does anybody want to change anything, to add anything to my response?
I don't know. I agree with you, Valentina.
Moving on to the next question then, and it is for you again, Valentina. In the interim, without an answer to the NOIR for risk-based COC, will the Ministry of Environment accept submissions without the NOIR completed?
I don't know why it's me. I probably clicked on the wrong thing. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Does anybody want to help me, please, with a risk-based CFC?
I would like to.
Please, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I could start. Ellen, please go after I do. I'm finding it a bit confusing why people are not considering remediation to include risk-based standards or risk assessment. The definition of remediation absolutely includes risk-based CFCs, risk-based standards, and risk assessment, both kinds, both Protocol 13, screening level risk assessment, and Protocol 1, detailed risk assessment. Remediation as defined in EMA and the CSR would include sampling, conducting physical remediation, conducting risk assessment as a desktop exercise, where though of course risk assessment involves field studies, sample information, investigation. It requires a DSI to be complete. So I would be surprised if a NER would, like, to me, a NER is required. But as Peter indicated, the ministry is going to provide an answer to this exact question over email. So please just ensure you're following the laws of BC, look up the definition of remediation, look up the requirements for NERs, and then meet those. That's your duty, I would say. And the ministry cannot provide anything more than what's in the law as it's required today.
I agree, Heather, completely with you. And it's a really good last point you made there. We don't have discretion to change the law on the fly like that. We only have discretion where it says that a director does have discretion. I have the same view. I believe an NOIR is required. And I think the phrase, I don't have it in front of me. I should have it in front of me, but the part that explains legally when the notice must be given, I think has some phrase around, you know, the handling or the management or the whatever of contaminated materials. I think the choice of words there will capture risk management. So I would share your view, and we will be checking on this and getting back on it. But I share your view that those notices are required in a risk assessment / risk management, probably more the risk management point in time.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from an Alan to Alan. So for questions that are forwarded to the email box, how does the entire audience find out what the answer is? And the example being the NOIR requirement for RAs.
We just talked about SuperQuest, and it occurred to me, I think at webinar number 5, I asked myself how, you know, all the folks who are listening into questions and we're asking people to write in, they might be curious about the answers too. Let us chew on that, okay? And we will see if we can figure out a good answer to keep everybody equally informed.
Okay, thank you. Valentina, will the ministry send out a notification whenever a protocol, etc., web page is updated?
All right, I will try to answer that question, even though I see maybe 2 questions here. Okay, so the protocols are mandatory. They're legal documents. They're enforceable. So by law, we are obligated to consult. Well, we're obligated to do consultation and collect the feedback, respond to feedback, and post the new documents on the website to make it publicly available. So obviously, from what I said, it follows that yes, we will be sending out notification on consultation, comments, posting the draft, posting the final. Yes, we are obligated to notify all British Columbians about that change. If a web page is updated, no, we won't be sending out a notification because we are not obligated to consult and notify people on the content of the government website. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Blair to you, Valentina. In the winter of 2014, the ministry indicated to CSAP that since risk assessment alone is not mentioned in Fact Sheet 21 or defined as a risk management within the CSR, risk assessment alone is not considered remediation for the purpose of submitting an NIR. And an NIR is thus not required when risk assessment alone is carried out at a site. Can you clarify what changes have happened to the Act since 2014 that specifically changed the definition of independent remediation in the Act such that work that did not need an NIR in 2014 is now considered independent remediation in 2021?
I think I will ask Heather to help me out. I can just address one little thing here which jumps out at me. as operations and policy manager. I think we communicated on several occasions that anything that was indicated 7 years ago might need to be verified with the ministry. And also, we don't do policy and legislation through fact sheets. I think those are the two things that I could address at my level. And I think, Heather, would you be so kind to help me out with the other components of the question?
Well, as we mentioned, we will respond more formally in writing, but one thing that's changed is that Protocol 1 came into force February 1st, and the ministry is considering detailed risk assessment a type of remediation. It is strange to me, the part of the question that says the ministry indicated CSAP something. So the only way the ministry can enforce and communicate requirements is in EMMA, the CSR protocols, as Valentina has just gone through exhaustively. So some sort of verbal indication or something that was just to CSAP, that's just strange, because in today's world, the ministry must communicate requirements to all British Columbians. We do that, as Valentina has clearly mentioned, through the release of the regulatory change in the protocols, and as well as EMMA change February 1st. So there may be a bit of disconnect here between what's happened in the past and what's enforced today, as Valentina mentioned. So enforced today, we will get back to you about the definition of remediation. Risk assessment is a type of remediation, and what that means for notices of independent remediation. I think that's the best we can do. Is there anything you could add though, Valentina, just in
No, thank you, Heather. That's exactly what my thinking was. I just wanted your input on that. Yes, and that's precisely what I was going to say. We don't do policy through fact sheets. It's not even legislated. There is a big disconnect, so I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, before we go on, there are still questions in the question box, Kelly. We are at 25 to 11 now. Do you want to continue for a few more minutes?
I'll leave that up to the management team to decide how much longer they want to go. Is there quite a few more questions?
It's hard for me to tell because I don't know how long each question is.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm definitely willing to take the next question.
Let's try another 15 minutes, maybe. Are we all good, panel members? Are we all good for another maybe 15 minutes?
Okay. Yes. Okay, the next question is to Heather. Is Environment updating the definition for typical and sensitive sediment? And when will Environment be posting this update?
So the definitions for typical and sensitive sediment were updated and changed in the Stage 11 amendment to the CSR. They came into force November 1st, 2017. There is no plan to do anything further with those definitions at this point in time. They would be considered as a part of a regulatory amendment in the future. As you know, the next regulatory amendment plan is for soil relocation. So the ministry's position is that the typical and sensitive sediment definitions are in force today. They apply. They apply as written. And the logic behind that was we actually changed the definitions to align with the Federal Fisheries Act changes, which came into force 2015. And so we are in alignment with federal policy and jurisdiction and law, and the CSR is as intended. These are the definitions that we desire to be used at contaminated sites in BC.
Thank you. Peter, this question relates to Protocol 17, specifically notification of independent remediation, NIR. In the webinar, it was indicated that risk-based remediation requires submission of an NIR. This was not previously required as provided in a ministry update in the CSAP quarterly newsletter winter 2014. This question relates to Protocol 17, specific notification of independent remediation. In the
Cindy,
webinar,
that's just a repeat.
Is that
it's
a repeat?
repeated
Okay.
several times. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Okay, I was getting down to it. It was sounding awfully familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, Alan, the next question is for you.
Valentina and Heather answered that question, and then we will have the final answer shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Peter. Alan, the next question is for you. The site registry on BC Online has been unavailable for quite a while. Do you have any, I'm not sure what the next word was meant to be, on when it will be up and running? insight?
No, not precisely, but we are working really hard right now to try to turn that around because it's caused us a lot of extra labor in the background providing that service and the access to the registry. So we are working on it very diligently right now and trying to get that back up online. But as it says on BC Online for all our clients, if you have a need for a search, you send an email to the site information advisor.
Okay, Heather, there's a note here from Michael. I'm not sure if it's a question or just notice to you. AG 15 was the basis for many instruments issued by the environment, so it was not considered draft by Ministry of Environment. Did you have any comment on that?
Well, as I mentioned during the process of updating Protocol 6 and the significant effort we put in to have legal interpretation and review and many other processes that went into updating Protocol 6, we were very sure that draft and Guidance 15 was draft. And so it was treated as such, and the parts of it were moved out, and the policy was finalized in the current version of Protocol 6. So that's an interesting point, Michael, but I just have to reiterate that today, as of February 1st, the Protocol 6 represents the policy of the ministry on those matters.
Okay, we have a question for Liliana from Aaron. If you have a site with a mobile LNAPL that has been determined not to be migrating based on the requirements of Protocol 16, would you need a pre-approval or high-risk reclassification prior to proceeding with a CSAP submission for a CFOC?
You do not need a pre-approval. Reclassification, it depends. If you had already classified your site as high risk previously, and then determined that the NAPL was not migrating, then you do need a reclassification. However, if your site was never classified as high risk, you do not need a reclassification, as long as you have enough length of evidence to demonstrate that NAPL is not migrating.
Okay, the next is a comments to Peter. This is a continuation of the question regarding Protocol 17. Answer is no. Fact sheet 21 requires an NIR be submitted to environment within 3 days of the start of any activity that involves handling, managing, including risk management or treating contamination. Furthermore, the CSR defines risk management as actions including monitoring, designed to prevent or mitigate risks to human health and the environment caused by contamination at a site. Risk assessment alone is not defined in Fact Sheet 21 or defined as risk management in the CSR. It is not considered remediation for the purpose of submitting an NIR. Therefore, submission of an NIR is not required when risk assessment alone is carried out at a site.
Oh yeah, this is the same question. I think it's keep repeating that questions. People are really confused on this. And then thanks for bringing all this in. And then as Heather and Valentina just mentioned, we are working towards a final answer to the public. And then be patient, stay tuned. Thank you.
Can I add something here? Just to correct in the spot, like in the moment. Fact sheet does not require anything. Fact sheet is a fact sheet. I think there is a confusion about the level of, even after the presentation, multiple presentations about legal architecture, legal authority. I think there is still confusion about how this works. Fact sheets are fact sheets. Their purpose is to provide clarification or information that is already exists somewhere. We do not do policies through fact sheets. Fact sheets cannot require anything. Fact sheets cannot define anything. Fact sheets are not legal documents. So saying that something is not identified or defined or required by a fact sheet is, I think it demonstrates some lack of knowledge of how administrative law works in the province and generally. So I really would like to emphasize that this section doesn't do policy through fact sheets. If you have questions, if you're in doubt, go to the Act open the Environmental Management Act and Contaminated Sites Regulations and protocols. These are the 3 types of documents that can require something, and these are the documents that we as the regulators follow. Just my 5 cents. Thank you.
Cindy, and the next question is on the same topic as well.
That's
this
the one from Blair.
Yeah, that one
okay.
on the same vein as well.
Okay. We then had another question with regards to cultural significance of ecological receptors is only applicable for Indigenous site uses, was the question.
I can answer this one. Yeah, the answer is no. So cultural significance, it could be to any group of people in British Columbia. So no, it is not limited to Indigenous site uses. It's broader interpretation is it could be a tree that's of cultural significance to an area of British Columbia. So no, it's broader.
Okay, and Heather, the next question is following on the same idea. It's in follow-up to my previous question. Since the entire province is subject to land claims by one Indigenous group or another, does this mean every site we work on under provincial jurisdiction requires some form of consultation with Indigenous groups? Or, in follow-up to my previous question, pardon me, is this a repeat again?
I don't know why it's repeating. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing repeated.
Okay.
I see it's to myself, but I'd be happy if others would chime in after I start the conversation. So the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act came into force and I think came into force and is applicable to contaminated sites work. I think there's a particular emphasis on consultation and engagement and discussion with Indigenous groups. There are treaties that apply, and that's a government-to-government style engagement and discussion. There are also other lands, as this person's indicating, where there's many land claims by Indigenous groups for the traditional territory and other rights. And so with contaminated sites, I would say this work is evolving. The act that's come into force is very important for us all to consider. And I think in particular, I would start the conversation with saying when there's offsite migration, and particularly discharges to the receiving environment, such as an aquatic receiving environment, it is very important to, as the word that's used is consult, but I would say bring into the conversation of a remediation plan with Indigenous groups that are applicable. And there are tools that the government of BC provides for identifying which groups are appropriate to get in touch with for areas of the province. So we expect in contaminated sites remediation work this to happen, particularly in some circumstances, and the ministry is still evolving and learning, and we expect all of you to evolve and learn as well as to how this will go in the future.
Okay,
Valentina. Valentina. No, Valentina should add to that, or Danielle should add to that too.
I think you covered it well, Heather.
Okay, Valentina, the next question is for you then. Can you apply for a release or AIP if some of the area of potential environmental concern have not been fully investigated because they are within a building footprint and therefore cannot be accessed?
For site releases, I think we were pretty clear there is a requirement to conduct investigation. So again, please refer to the regulation and the act. In case of an approval in principle, there is some flexibility. Having a full detailed site investigation completed is not a prerequisite. However, it may be required depending on a statutory decision maker who is reviewing the file. I cannot speak to that because it's a discretional thing, and every SDM will have a different opinion depending on the circumstance. And not different opinion. I'm saying an SDM may have a different opinion from mine because I don't see your site. I don't have all the information in front of me, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. But I can say that it's not a prerequisite for the application. For approval in principle. Release process is a different matter.
Okay. Valentina, the next question is for you from Travis. Many dry cleaners are switching from using PERC to more eco-friendly solvents. Does the ministry have any opinion on when a dry cleaner would no longer meet the threshold of a Schedule 2 activity based on the type of solvent they are using?
I will only address the policy component of that, and then Heather, if you feel that you have things to add from your perspective, please do jump in. So the ministry plans our work, our policy work based on the emerging trends and based on emerging issues. And if ministry identifies that this is an emerging issue, staff time will be allocated, resources will be allocated, and then we will work on a policy project. Whether this is happening right now, no, that hasn't been indicated to us as an emerging issue. So if this is something that is becoming an issue, we will definitely deal with that. Heather?
Sure. The ministry did its best during the stage 10 and 11 amendment to consider this situation. And so standards and Schedule 2 activities and uses were included in the CSR currently today, but starting in stage 11 for wet cleaning, the other type of cleaning that's done instead of dry cleaning. So there's dry cleaners and there's wet cleaners. There's a change from PERC for dry cleaners to nonylphenol and nonylphenol ethoxylates for wet cleaners. So I would suggest that the Schedule 2 use is the way it is written today, that's in force, and the prescribed substances in the CSR today reflect both the traditional dry cleaning solvents and the more modern wet cleaning substances. So again, the definition of a contaminated site would be triggered by CSR section 11, and then the schedules 3.1 to 3.4 contain the substances that are prescribed for defining a contaminated site. So I think in current day, we have covered both, but in particular, this question is about changing Schedule 2. And as Valentina mentioned, that would be something we would consider as the ministry becomes aware of any issue or discrepancy. Or so please do submit that information if you have something that's even more modern than the release of the Stage 11 CSR amendment.
Okay, we have a question for Danielle from Ian. The Ministry of Environment now requires consideration of climate change in submissions such as remediation plans. Will the ministry be developing guidance and defining expectations for incorporating climate change assessments and associated climate change scenarios?
Hi, thanks, Cindy. I just want to make sure that I'm not sure that I'm fully grasping the question where it says that the ministry now requires. I'm not sure what point in time that's in reference to. Currently, there is no new requirement under the legislation, regulation, or protocols about any new considerations about future climate conditions. However, the existing provisions in the legislation, regulation, and protocols do exist. And that's about as general as an answer as I can give, because obviously it would be up to a statutory decision maker's discretion what conditions need to be considered for an approach on a particular site. Now, if the question might be getting confused with our current climate change policy intentions and initiative, just to clarify that we have communicated 2 draft policy intentions that we will be developing and seeking further consultation, likely over a number of years, before it would be included in potentially the legislation, possibly and likely within the regulation. Then we would consider any protocols that may need to be either revised or developed to bring those changes into, or sorry, the changes would be brought into effect by the regulation supported by any protocols. And after that stage, we would consider developing any guidance and defining expectations. So if that's where the question is coming from, the question might be coming in a couple of years too early. So I hope that's provided clarification. I think that's all I can add right now.
Okay, Kelly, we've gone well past the 15
Cindy,
minutes.
hold on a second. Cindy, we missed one question before that. It's not the question, it can be a question or a statement. So about the links.
Oops, I'm just scrolling up to it now. Valentina, adding links to the website where guidance was moved to web pages should be consistent with the government's mandate to make the information more generally accessible.
So I just wanted to mention that we did do that, and I'm not sure again how that was missed, because we did send out a message, a site imaging news. Maybe I would recommend that APs and other stakeholders subscribe to our site imaging news page. Because we did communicate that, and I'm looking at this page right now. February 1st, there was a notification sent out which has the links. It has documents and the links to where they are right now. So I suggest that maybe, as I said before, APs and other stakeholders present today familiarize themselves with our pages, web pages, and overall our website, which will be easier as we change it to streamline it. Thank you.
So we've gone over quite a bit here, and we had said we'd go another 15 minutes. I think we've actually gone longer than that. So I'm suggesting that we kind of cut this off now. We could be here all day, and we want to respect people's time. So what we have been doing in the past is questions we haven't gotten to, we will respond to them offline to the people who asked the questions. I think quite a few of them still are relating to the issue with the NIRs for risk assessment as well, so we can figure out the answer to that one. Does that sound all right for the panel?
Thanks, Kelly. I think that's a good idea. I appreciate everybody's extra time and attention, and I think the panel has given a good effort. And as you said, Kelly, will follow up with any additional answers required. So really appreciate everybody's interest, raising any issues and concerns that we may be able to accommodate. And if we aren't able to address them within our own abilities and authorities, we can surely communicate that to others. And just thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for all your questions. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.